So hi, everybody. I'm Jean Lorber, conservation scientist with the Virginia chapter of the Nature Conservancy. My background is I'm a forester. I graduated from Virginia Tech, so Appalachian kind of applied silviculture. Been with TNC for about 18 years. And all of my GIS work and skills have been acquired on the job over the years. And so this is more of an applied presentation because everything that you just heard Randy talk about, everything we've been talking about before, all the interesting work about modeling, I'm assuming has already been done, right, for this landscape or for this presentation. It has been done. So I'm focusing on how we as an organization, as a collaborative, the Fire Learning Network, are applying it and how it kind of touches down. So big picture, I want to focus on, you know, right, the overall structure is we have desired conditions that are from an existing national forest plan, and those desired conditions include NRV. The bulk of my time I'll spend on the current conditions part because that's where we, I think, have tried. Well, we have spent a lot of time assessing the forest in novel ways, trying to synthesize new sources of data to come up with hopefully a best in science snapshot of what our forest ecosystem looks like to compare that to the desired conditions that are in the plan. So I'll talk a lot about that. And then I'll talk a little bit about how this forest has utilized the Ecodeparture data and really some of the themes that come out of doing an Ecodeparture period. So, I'm part of our Fire Learning Network. I've been burning for 10 to 15 years. The forest has been burning, at large for 20 years. So again, the applied source of this inquiry for us was we've been burning for 20 years. Is fire doing what we thought it would do? We have the sound ecological theory, fire history in the Appalachians, that puts us onto the track of, okay, we need to be burning at a large scale. We need to be using silviculture at a large scale. But now that we've been doing it for 20 years, did those outputs, the burning, result in the outcomes that we thought we would achieve? Oak regeneration, structural diversity. I'll dive into that a bit. So again, this is really one theme you'll hear me come back to is that an eco-departure gives you the mental space and gives you the ecological big picture to examine all of your vegetation management work that we all do together. So, I forget who's on the phone, but, a real quick locator of our forests. We're in the Ridge and Valley and Blue Ridge ecoregions in Western Virginia with a tiny bit of West Virginia, a tiny bit of Kentucky as well, but really in West Virginia, Ridge and Valley. Here are the most dominant BPS models. Northeastern interior dry mesic oak, Central Appalachians dry oak pine forest, Southern Appalachians montane oak. So we're on the dry end of the spectrum, 30, 45 inches a year of precipitation. We're not the Southern Blue Ridge, like Nantahala Pisgah, that gets, 60 to 80 inches a year. So we're on the dry end of the spectrum, and you'll see that represented in our forest types that we show. But visually, we just wanted to take you on a quick tour around the forest so that when we start talking about how we're, the effects that we're having on the vegetation and the forest types, you can picture it better, hopefully. So if you remember, anybody who's seen the Blues Brothers, right, there's that scene where they pull up to the honky tonk and, can they play there? They ask. And the owner says, oh, sure, you can play here. We've got all types of music, country and Western. We have basically all types of forest types. We got dry oak, we've got mesic oak. I'm overstating it a bit, but this is a mixed oak dominated system, dry oak all the way to mesic oak, everything in between. We definitely have some pine oak heath. As a significant part of our landscape, we have mesic oak, we have mesic hardwood coves, maidenhair fern there, and we have a tiny little bit of high elevation spruce on certain parts of the forest. But by and large, we're a mixed oak ecosystem. And so, as we conceive of management, what are we trying to achieve through our management? We have unburned forest on the left, burned forest on the right, right? We're trying to turn that predominantly closed canopy forest into open canopy. We're trying to turn a dense mid-story into a sparse mid-story. We're trying to change species composition away from maple towards oak. So here's just a couple of pictures. This is one of our burn units, TNC, that's been burned twice by the time this picture was taken. And we've got this, even in this one picture, we've got this mosaic. We've got a little bit of early. We've got thinning canopy, more sunlight hitting the ground, starting to create that open woodland structure. And here's just a shot of our typical fire effects, or rather, fire behavior. Springtime burns. On the right is not the same location, but it's just another example of, this is a high intensity spot that created some early successional, not uncommon in our neck of the woods. We do have projects that rely on silviculture to be the surgery to create that open structure and then burn afterwards. This is one such unit. Here we have aerial view of just silvicultural units, and that themselves have a diversity of outcomes that create open canopy, that create early successional, just different residual basal area targets. So again, y'all are familiar with all this, but I just wanted to kind of summarize in one nice package about what this forest looks like. Here's a drone shot that we're trying to get more and more of one of our burn units, been burned 3 times. And again, we see this mosaic of open woodland structure in blue, early successional structure and age in yellow. This is one of our more successful burn units where we have a mosaic. And we're getting to the point now, as we'll go into detail, that we're tabulating, we're keeping track of all of those outcomes. So all that's useful in Ecodeparture, but let's get back to the first stage of the Ecodeparture, which is the desired conditions. And so again, I'm not going to get too deep into desired conditions because, I wasn't a part of the modeling that created it, but certainly teams of landscape ecologists and maybe LANDFIRE was involved when the GW plan was revised back in 2014. So 2010, 2014 is when a lot of modeling is done. But it was one of the first in the country to use the 2012 planning rule, in which essentially NRV was encouraged to be a part of that process, if not directly mandated. Amy and Lisa, I'm sure, can fine-tune that statement, but NRV was part of this plan. Ecosystem diversity was a desired condition, and they used NRV modeling to describe that by major forest type. So I've got a lot of screenshots from the plan, and they're not visually perfect, but I'm doing this to illustrate that I'm pulling this directly out of an existing forest plan. These concepts that we're working on and trying to achieve outcome under have embedded in them the concepts that we've been talking about all day. So here's the description for oak forest and woodlands, which is the vast majority of the forest in terms of acreage. They want an understory that consists of non-woody plants. They want an open canopy structure in a large chunk of the acreage. They want woodland native grasses, again, that kind of grass forb understory. Not only all about trees. We want regenerating forests. So this is just the kind of more qualitative descriptions. What went into that, or what's the ecological reasoning for why those are the conditions? We have a lot of fire history in the Appalachians, summarized here in this LaFawn. This is a screenshot of LaFawn paper that came out in 2017 after the GW plan, but a lot of the same research that was cited in the LaFawn synthesis was also cited in the GW plan. But in that document, in that body of work, we have this consistent presence of fire, low to medium severity fire, regular, occasional high severity fire. All of that's a sliding scale. Even more of it on dry sites, even less of it on more mesic sites. But again, we have this kind of general average, and those all become inputs, right, to just disturbance inputs into the NRV calculations. And here's the output. We all recognize this, in this case, just a 5-box model. And in the case of the GW, unfortunately, they kind of lumped all oak ecosystems from the mesic to the very dry into one category. And so subsequent national for subsequent modeling, NRV modeling efforts throughout the Appalachians have broken that out, but this is what this is what we're working under in the GW. So, early, and again, squint your eyes at these numbers like we do, but in general, we want, some early, the majority of this ecosystem we want in an open condition, and then the remainder enclosed. And again, to reiterate what I was saying, these are separate NRV modeling exercises. Some that were done as part of a plan revision, like the Nantahala Pisgah, this third line. We'll move that out of the way. Some as part of a plan revision, some as kind of state of the science or update exercises. But all of these results are for the dry oak ecosystems or ecozones specifically. And so this is just illustrating that there's a range of outcomes that even when you have different groups of people in the essentially the same ecoregion modeling, you get slightly different outcomes, and they're not notice that the GW doesn't even have old growth. Like, it was not a 7-box model. It was the only one to do a 5-box model. So, but anyway, the trend still holds. We want a little bit of early, a lot of open. Let's skip that. So there's our desired conditions. That's what we're working towards. That's the large-scale ecological goals. So now, as part of our Ecodeparture, and this is a project I've been working on in conjunction with the supervisor's office, specifically the forest silviculturists, and a small team, a small executive committee, if you will, to really go deep and hopefully in doing so, get an accurate picture of the current conditions on the forest to help define that Ecodeparture, and then use those results to develop projects. So we, for current conditions, our forest type, we have a local model of ecozones. I'll go into that in a second. We use, for canopy cover, we use LANDFIRE, but I have a plus here because we curated we built on the LANDFIRE results. And I'll show you details about that. For age, we had an easy source, which was the Forest Service's own stand level inventory, FSVEG, that had stand age. So we have forest type, we have structure, and we have age. And there we go. That can generate our 5-box model. So our forest type was ecozones. This was created. This is a ecological classification product created by a regional forest ecologist and landscape ecologist, Steve Simone. Our Fire Learning Network commissioned this, and the Fire Learning Network consists of multiple state agencies, TNC, and the Forest Service. We commissioned Mr. Simone to do this. He has since done an ecozones exercise across almost, if not all, of the Southern Appalachian National Forests. So we have this really cool, consistent data product, and it's typically results in 15 to 20 ecological communities, wall-to-wall GIS coverage, across usually a proclamation boundary of a forest or a district. So again, that was our forest type. Here's our U.S. Forest Service inventory, and I know FSVEG isn't perfect. Any Forest Service employee will tell you that, but it's the best we got. It's wall to wall, and you do see, particularly where management has occurred, like where I'm circling right here. You can see the thumbprint of past management. Yeah, it's accurate. So there's a 19-year-old stand that was clear cut, 19 years ago. So we have age. So let's get to the most juicy component of the current conditions assessment is canopy cover. So like I said, we started with LANDFIRE's forest canopy cover layer. And what you're looking at is maybe of 250,000 acres of the GW. And, just to start off with, most of our ecosystem is closed canopy. And this is binned. We've taken the LANDFIRE 10% canopy cover segments and binned them. And this is the outcome. We're just kind of making these broad categories of closed, open, and early based on definitions in the GW plan. So mostly dark green, mostly closed canopy. What's in red here are burn units. And you can see that LANDFIRE is picking up changes within those burn units. So that's great. Love seeing that. And taking a closer look at that area I just circled, this is about 2,000 acres, this red polygon here, The blue color is open woodland structure, so like 30 to 60 square feet of basal area or around 30 to 60% canopy cover. So within management areas, we had already been working for years on, as part of our fire effects monitoring program, to categorize canopy cover, canopy structure, if you will. And so we just built on that. We utilize that existing photo interpretation based canopy structural delineations that we've been doing, and we brought that into the current picture of canopy cover or canopy structure for this current conditions assessment. So yeah, I'm just highlighting here that this is one of the benefits of a fire learning network. We can create these long-term strategies that we didn't, when we started doing this paper right here, the characterizing effects paper in 2018 is when we published it. We had no idea that we would put it would get hoovered up into an Ecodeparture, but great, it's perfectly legitimate use of that data set. So again, here's this 2,000 acres-ish, and LANDFIRE is showing a lot of kind of open woodland structure. Here's Sentinel-2 imagery from the year of the burn. So we burned it in spring. This is midsummer probably. And so we can see those burn footprints. We can see canopy structure, in terms of very broad categories. This is NAIP imagery from 3 years afterwards. We can zoom in, we hand delineate where we've got early open and closed. And when we do that, so this is what LANDFIRE showed, and this is what we show. So the coloring, the blue is the same, open woodlands, the yellow is early successional. So we feel like and we have monitoring plots. So we have visited this site to collect field data as well. So overall, we turned a lot of what LANDFIRE would call open woodlands into more early successional in this specific case. This is just an example of how we incorporated this kind of locally created photo interpretation of forest canopy structure on about 200,000 acres, the burn portfolio, and utilized that in the Ecodeparture, or utilized it in the current conditions. So that was one way that we built on the LANDFIRE data canopy cover layer. Another way that we did it was using remote sensing products like those from LCMS. This is a U.S. research station, Rocky Mountain Research Station product, covers the continental U.S., but it's basically a change or disturbance detection program or product. Goes back to, it tracks Landsat images over time. So it goes back to 1985 and puts an annual timestamp on when if a pixel changes. So, a great treasure trove of data about past disturbance that I can't necessarily see when I'm looking at, say, this image. A recent disturbance, yes, but a disturbance that happened 20 years ago, more subtle. And so we used, I'm fast forwarding here back to where we were. So LCMS, we took a look at it and said, can we use this to further refine canopy cover and to some extent age? When canopy cover bleeds into, you've got zero canopy cover, so age is reset. You've got early. So while LCMS, it covers the entire forest, there isn't a ton of it in any one year. So this wasn't a huge lift to kind of to do some QA/QC on what we think LCMS was saying. This is the same burn unit. So this is a managed area that we've already handled with our photo interpretation, but I'm just showing you this so you can have this sense of the different outcomes or what the different data sources show you. But so anything in a color here is some sort got flagged as disturbance. There's no degree of disturbance. It's just kind of binary. You got disturbed or not. So yeah, this same burn unit that we had a lot of early in gets flagged with a lot of disturbance. That makes sense. LCMS, the footprint of LCMS usually makes sense with what we know to be true on the ground. So like I was saying, the trend of LCMS over time, on average, back to 1985 to current, 6,000 acres a year gets flagged by LCMS on the forest. All of that is all of that early? Is all of that still closed? Is some of it open? What's the right answer? That's what I'd characterize it as we're in the process of figuring out. But we created a small rule set for how we would use it in the Ecodeparture, and that's what I'll talk about. So this is an area that you will see that LCMS flagged as disturbed. So this is about, I think, 5,000 acres on the screen. This is pre-disturbance, 2005. This is all summertime imagery. So if we're considering LCMS as a potential source of earlier open acreage, this is our kind of proof of concept. Here's the year that LCMS flags as a disturbance. In talking to the local silviculturist, I think it was two-line chestnut borer on that kind of had this widespread defoliation event on the mountain that summer. So visually, you can just see it. This is fully, in the middle of summer, but we see a lot of brown. And then 3 years after, if you squint, and I didn't zoom in, I apologize, but you can see that there's definitely changes from pre-disturbance, right? You can see scattered, places where the basal area has been reduced by half, or in some cases by 100%. But most of this I would categorize as kind of moderate, maybe loss of forest canopy. And so here's what LCMS flags as disturbed. Again, no sense of high severity or low severity, but just disturbed. So that looks pretty right. I mean, that is accurate that something went on there, but what do we do with this? How do we categorize every single pink pixel here as, okay, is it still closed? Is it early or open? We could do photo interpretation because, again, it's only like 6,000 acres a year. But we wanted to see if we could automate this into something that's accurate, automate the classification of this. So the first thing that we said was, well, okay, a single disturbed pixel which is 30 meters, is not necessarily early or open. And because this is like a binary disturbance or not disturbed, it's really one pixel can't tell you anything about open, because open by definition would be kind of, you'd have to look at a neighborhood, which is exactly what we did, but you'd have to look at multiple pixels together. And if some of them were disturbed and some of them weren't, we thought, okay, that's a reasonable approximation of open. So that's what we did. We used a neighborhood analysis to delineate patches of earlier open, and we had very simple rules. If a lot of the pixels in the neighborhood were disturbed, as coded by LCMS, that would be early. If just a few were disturbed, then that would be open. And the outcome of that is this. And so early here is yellow. And, early here is yellow. I think, and I'm going to scooch back to the post-disturbance imagery a couple, right? So our rule using LCMS says that all of this is yellow, all of this is early, and that's not the case. So what we've done right now is not accurate. It needs to be tweaked further. So just, I'm letting you look under the hood of a process that's, we're still in the middle of our process. And so we'll tweak it. And if in the end we have to do photo interpretation of, the acreage that falls under LCMS, that's fine. But, we're trying to automate it. But we want to be accurate at the end of the day. So that's that's our ultimate goal. But so let's just pretend that the departure analysis or rather the current conditions that I just showed you are the true current conditions. We have our desired conditions from the plan. So now we can do a departure assessment, right? Now we can do an ecological departure. And so this is what you're looking at on the screen, these results. So 6% of the whole forest, 6% early, 13% mid-close, 1% mid-open, 2% late open, but the vast majority is late closed. So even if we're being a little oversensitive and calling too much early, we're still not at a lot of early. And if you think back to the desired percent of early for oak, so these are the numbers for oak, we do have a single number here. I do like single numbers as a place to start and something to squint at, to kind of channel, I think, Amy's point and others' points. Like, we don't want to get too in love with our process here. That's kind of rough, but it gives us and it shows us what end of the spectrum we can be on is how we look at it. So really departed. I'm going to skip over this slide, but this is, we can take a more nuanced look. We can look at each ecosystem and its departure. When we do that, we basically get to the same number for dry oak, heath, all of the oaks. Even if we split out the oaks into multiple, we kind of get the same result. Cove is very not departed. Cove is kind of very much on track with desired conditions. And it's mostly because we don't need much disturbance in Cove from an NRV perspective, and we don't have much. I'm not going to dwell on that. Let's keep going. Because I want to talk about, again, that was not using Ecodeparture. That was creating an Ecodeparture. Now I want to talk about using it, because we are using it in some cool ways. So I think big picture, the Ecodeparture that you see here, which is still a work in progress, but is kind of being piecemealed out as projects are developed. That has also happened over the past year, where I've done other eco-departures for parts of the forest using the same methodology. Now we're doing one grand unifying forest level eco-departure. That has influenced NEPA project design. It has also enabled adaptive management discussions. That's a point I made earlier, that having this big picture assessment of the entire forest enables individual managers or individual rangers to go, okay, I see what the big needs are on the forest. Now I know how to guide my staff to design projects that will address those needs. Now we can better justify what those needs are to the public because we have the big picture. So this is just one example. This is the Archer Knob project. It's 27,000 acres. And I'm just highlighting text here right from the NEPA document, right from the EA. The ecologic departure analysis looking at current versus desired stand structure attributes. That's what they're going to be looking at. Purpose and need here of the project is focused on addressing the difference between existing and desired conditions. Plan there, all this language. Planned actions would improve overall ecological departure by doing X, Y, Z. There's a little bit left. I think folks are still new and trying to explain this to the public and get comfortable with doing that. There's not an eco-departure kind of table that summarizes the whole thing. In this document, I'm showing you this table, and it's painful, but this is what's in the EA. This is not like this is a technically competent table, but it's not great for illustrating. But here we have current early circled in red. Here we have projected early if the project was enabled. Yeah, we see early percent go up. And here we have projected open if it goes up. The point I wanted to make here, this table is just one small illustration of this overall point, which is the managers tend to be they're more comfortable talking about what's my current and what's my desired for a specific element, like for oak, oak and open woodlands. What's current, what's desired? I want to talk about that. Very not comfortable with talking about eco-departure of the whole project area or of the whole forest. So it's how does that fit with what I just said about we like eco-departure because it gives us a big picture purpose and need? It's two different levels, right? The eco-departure is that big picture purpose and need, but at the project level, when you get down to it, folks need to focus on something very tactical and tactile, which is I don't have oak woodlands, I need oak woodlands. So that's kind of been a lesson learned for me in terms of messaging and how hard to lean on some terminology or others. They're talking about region treatments to create early. They're talking about thinning treatments to create open. Great. I'm going to wrap up because I've been at 30 minutes and it's been a wall of words. But here's the major graph about here's what the amount of early, open, and close that will remain in this project. I would love it would be great if there was a desired, according to the plan, a desired amount to compare it to. So just like a little communications nudge. But my last point is that this enables adaptive management, particularly with burning. We've been burning for 20 years, and getting acres black is a valid outcome. We know that that's the work that needs to be done. But I think now, after 20 years of work, more and more folks want to, including managers, not just scientists like me, but managers want to know the outcomes that they need to shoot for, because we have burns that achieve very different things, very different outcomes. We have some burns that, despite being burned 3 or 4 times, have almost 0% early and open. We have other burns that, after a single burn, are 50% early successional overnight, hundreds of acres of early created overnight. Not saying that any one of those are good or bad. There might be underlying site conditions. This might be a mesic site versus a dry site, or the goals might be different. Point is, there's a lot of different ways, there's a lot of different outcomes that can be achieved. Which ones are, correct for this project? And Ecodeparture gives you the context for choosing different outcomes, and have those in a consistent way across a whole portfolio. So what you're seeing on the screen here is one zone of the GW, so about 500,000 acres. These are all of their burn units. And we've been able to categorize all their burn units by the dominant ecozones, the dominant forest types. And then these ecological goals, like here we have open, and here we have 70% open as a goal on pine sites. Here we have 30% open as a goal on mesic oak sites. This comes from NRV modeling. Early structures, same thing. These compositional goals of oak and pine regen, those are kind of, embedded in, other, goals that we want for the ecosystem. But, the priorities of where these ecological goals exists is driven by the type, and which units they're applied to is driven by, what the dominant ecozones of the unit are. So one, the fact that we can even talk about different flavors of burn units and different goals, all of those goals are tiered to an Ecodeparture, which sets out the major goals that we can then work on we can select and intentionally work towards project after project. This is just about monitoring, and that we can also know this, and this feeds back into Ecodeparture. When we know how much progress we're making towards those goals, that becomes part of our adaptive management. So we're having those discussions as well. And what that ends up with, with a lot of hard work about this, with managers and scientists, is a new, a burn unit level set of goals that is driven by large picture need as defined by the Ecodeparture, and an assessment of how management has achieved or made progress towards those goals from monitoring. And that's your adaptive management loop. So here we have the specific burn unit. It's got this specific goal of 15% open, which is in the dark circle here. And we talk about, okay, what is this unit? What have past effects been? What do we want the next burn to look like? All of this is informed with Ecodeparture at the beginning of it, because Ecodeparture sets the big picture purpose and need, as does the plan. I'm going to end there. I'm over time. I apologize, but I'm happy to take questions. I think I've got like 10, 15 minutes for that.
John, thank you so much. And again, apologies for my presentation running over, but folks, we're here. And I would love to hear questions, comments on basically getting this to the ground. I really like that last slide, John. I thought that really tied everything together nicely and is very succinct.
I have a question. So it's pretty striking in the data that you showed. And just thanks, John. That was a really, really fascinating presentation. But it's very striking the amount of closed forests that you have, which is very similar to my part of the world out west, where we have dry forests that are really closed compared to the reference condition. And one of the things that we see here is there is a lot of work towards restoration and reducing fire risk in these dry forest systems. And so they do a lot of thinning and burning treatments. And while they are certainly opening forest stands in these treatments, they're not truly creating open states. They're opening closed forests.
Structure.
That
right.
Forest still remains in a closed state if you were going to classify it into a structural state.
Okay.
And so I'm just wondering, if that's happening where you're at. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I have the luxury of being kind of a half step removed from the what a project says it's doing, right? When I'm doing the monitoring, when I'm looking at imagery, and I'm just proof is in the pudding, right? I don't care if you said it's going to be open. Did you actually create open through your actions, right? Sorry, there's so many things to scroll through, but did if you said this was going to be open, but man, there's zero canopy there today, well, it's early. So that's what we code, right? That's what we monitor. That's what that's what it becomes. So one, there's that monitoring side where we can really get at, no matter intentions, what actually happened on the ground. Two, no, I don't think we have that same problem. Just because on the silvicultural side, the treatments need to be commercial most of the time. If you're doing canopy manipulations, they'll need to be commercial. So those err on the side of too thinned as opposed to not thinned enough. So the sweet spot that I showed of that unit that was thinned and burned early on, that's what we want, and that was barely commercial. But I'd say, thinning, if that, like that NEPA document says it's going to do 2,000 acres of thinning to create open, I will double check. We will double check, but I feel pretty certain that those will mostly be open acres.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think part of the issue here is the cultural acceptance. And people, see these logs coming out, and due to past history, they're very concerned about tree removal. And over time, I've heard this silviculturist here on the Deschutes National Forest say and you can see it, the treatments have gotten more open. They are they are pushing that bar. They, have a little bit more cultural or social license, but it's still not fully open for us. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah. Louis, levez la main.
Oui. So, well, how much time did you spend in this project doing the interpretation and ballpark? I mean, is this a large commitment of your time, or I'm just curious, like you've been working on this project for a little while, so there's not a clear beginning and end on any one thing because you've been involved in it. But how much time do you think you're spending in this additional work beyond, you get the LANDFIRE data and all that, but then you do this extra work?
Right. Yeah. I'd kind of answered in two phases. There was the moment where I said, it's 2018. I said, okay, let's go back and look at everything in our modern burn era, which was basically 20 years. So that was a lot of work, right? Because I'm going back, we burn, let's just say 20,000 acres a year times 20 years. That was a lot of work. That was, probably all told 3 to 4 months of work sitting here photo interpreting 400,000 acres. Looking ahead, now that we've got the backlog taken care of, now we've made it. Now we're just focused on every year, basically. Like, what did we burn last spring? Usually it's a lag of, we look at the spring before the year before, just to give the fire effects time to express themselves. But so if I'm just looking at 20,000 acres in any given year, that's a couple of weeks, if that. So it's not, once you've kind of cleaned house and dealt with your historical backlog, every year is not a ton of work. And now we're looking at using, in addition to, well, one, I didn't have LCMS when I did that historical backlog, so that was like a great kind of place to start looking. Is if I had LCMS data for a unit, I could key in on those big polygons and look closer there. So I didn't have LCMS. Now I do. NDVI is a great way, like using Sentinel imagery to get, wall-to-wall NDVI values, from the leaf on, is a great way to fast track. And you could leave it at that and get kind of a C+ version. So you could just automate NDVI using Google Earth Engine. I had an intern, GIS intern, who did a lot of this Ecodeparture model builder, by the way. His name was Eli. but he showed me like Google Earth Engine. He showed me Google Earth Engine that you could calculate a lot of NDVI very quickly. So that's one way to fast track it. It's not super as accurate as, photo interpretation using higher resolution imagery, but it's okay.
3 months, a few weeks, and a different contact lens prescription.
I am able to intensively hyper focus. That's the term.
Another great question in the chat, which is there a link to the Access Ecosystem Assessment documentation for the Appalachian Forest Plan? Is there something you can share with us, Sean, to...
Yeah, so the GW plan was 2014. I was actually mining it. I was rereading it in preparation for this presentation. There's not, so in the EIS appendices is where you typically find a lot of the good, assumptions and rules, et cetera. I didn't find a ton of, we modeled, low intensity fire at every 20 years and, I didn't find those numbers. If you wanted to, I would look in for an Appalachian National Forest that does kind of show their work or show the math. That the Nantahala-Pisgah EISs I found had more of that kind of granular modeling information, and it was done so recently that maybe there's they have a website where you can download even further. Lisa, you and Amy, you guys might know more about that than I do, but the GW plan that I've been talking about, I couldn't find a lot of the justification or the math behind the outcomes. So I apologize for not being able to show that.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. Really appreciate that, Jean. And I will probably be looking back at the recording just because I appreciated seeing it go from broad scale down to, again, that last slide. I thought it was super useful, and I'll be thinking about how to help partners I work with do something similar.